Hi everybody, Andrew Cuneo here with another YouTube video. Today I thought I'd do a somewhat different video. This is going to be a video that's a kind of a tips and tricks of how to play an arena video. It's not going to be a video that's tips and tricks of how to maximize how you interact with the economy. That's just not what this is going to be. This is going to be how do you make some of the kind of fancier, really technical plays on Arena. If you're somebody who's watching my stream, I think a lot of people probably are very familiar with the Magic rules. They're longtime players if they're watching this channel, but hopefully there's some people who are newer to Magic. Maybe you started playing Magic on Arena. Maybe you've only been playing for a few months or a year. And Arena does a really good job of making it so that you can start playing Magic without really knowing all of the timing rules. It kind of takes care of all of that for you. And that's great. But it does come at a cost that there are certain opportunities to make fancier plays that you're just not going to get access to if you don't know how to really use the user interface well. So I'm going to go through a bunch of examples of kind of more technical plays and show how you can make the most of your cards and how you can use the options Arena gives you to the best of its ability. It's important to note that basically any play that you can make within the rules of Magic, you can make on Arena, but you may need to use full control mode. I think full control mode is something that a lot of, especially newer players, don't really understand. When is a good time to use it? How can it help you? And I'm hoping if you watch this video, you're going to get to see some spots where it would actually be useful for you to go into full control mode. So with that, let's jump into some of the examples. So here's a first example, and before we actually jump into the examples, I want to show a setting that I'm using that I'd recommend that you turn on if you're interested in trying to do fancier plays. So it's this show phases setting. I have this checked, and what it does is it makes it so that when I'm in the combat step, I've got some additional icons here that are going to allow me to get more fine-grained control of when I'm going to get priority. So priority is basically you have a chance to cast a spell, which normally when you've got instants in your hand, Arena is going to give you priority when it thinks you might want to cast them. It does a pretty good job of that. It doesn't do a perfect job of that. And you can enforce that you want to have a stop at a particular point by clicking on one of these icons at a variety of spots. So here, if I wanted to stop at the end of my opponent's turn, I could put a stop in there. You can see that not this circle is the equivalent of this circle. They both are the same phase. If I want stops in combat, like a stop after damage, I can put a stop there now. Same thing with stops on your turn over here. So that's an important thing to understand if you want to make some of these more complicated technical plays. But for this particular play I want to show off, we're not actually going to need to use the stops. This is just how do you make good, tight technical play, and Arena is actually going to let us do it the way that you would want to. So in this case, I'm attacking with the first striker. Sparky has chosen to double block. So my creature would die if I don't play one of the spells in my hand. Now, Sparky's tapped out, so we don't really need to worry about what would happen if Sparky played an instant. But if Sparky was untapped and we were concerned about, well, what would happen if Sparky had some sort of an instant, what we can do is we could just go through the first strike damage phase. I've killed their skate zombie. Now, at this point, my creature is a first striker. It's already dealt damage, so it's about to die to the Kravikan Scoundrel. But Arena knows I have an instant in my hand, so I can play my instant, kill the Scoundrel before normal damage is dealt, and then my Dragonkin Berserker lived, and everything worked out fine. So the point of that example is basically just if you have first strikers and you have instants that deal damage, just Arena is going to give you priority after first strike damage is dealt. So this matters if you're trying to block a big creature with the first striker and your plan is to have your first striker deal some damage and then you're going to play your instant to finish off the creature. You have an additional degree of safety if you just let your creature deal the damage, the first striker deal the damage, before you play your instant. That means that your opponent has fewer ways to make things go wrong for you. And in the example I showed where they were double blocking, if you let your creature deal the damage first, they can't play one of their instants to save their creature. So you're going to get to deal the damage with your Berserker. All right, example number 2, and this is going to be another example where Arena actually does the thing you want without you having to worry about it. So I've got this card in my hand, Futurist Spell Thief, that when you flash it into play, you conjure a duplicate card of a spell that's on the stack into your hand. So this is kind of like a copy effect, a fork effect if you've been playing for a long time. What I want to have happen is I want to cast my Opt, and while it's on the stack, I want to play my Futurist Spell Thief so I get a replacement Opt into my hand. The way that Magic works, whenever you have priority, if you do something, you actually retain priority and get the first chance to respond to it. But the way Arena works in general is that it doesn't behave that way. When you do something, priority automatically passes to your opponent. And the reason for that is there's not really a very good reason that you ever want to respond to something that you've done in Magic. Generally, you want to do something, give your opponent a chance to respond, and then after your thing resolves or after they decide to respond, then you want to do your next thing. There's very rarely cases that you want to do something and immediately respond before your opponent gets priority. But in the case of targeting your own spells on the stack, you actually do want to retain priority and cast your spell right away. And the developers of Arena have accounted for that. So if we watch, I'm going to cast my Opt. If you didn't have a card like Futurist Spell Thief in your hand, your opponent would have gotten priority right away. It wouldn't be saying resolve here. It would have been on the opponent. But because Arena knows that the Futurist Spell Thief works this way, it's given me priority, or it's retained priority for me. And so I get to play my Spell Thief. It conjures a new copy of the Opt. So I wind up with this fake Opt in my hand, basically. So this is another case where Arena, you don't need to do anything special with full control in order to make this slightly more technical play. All right, here's an example where you actually do need to use full control. So what's going to happen is, let's say I want to attack with my Network Disruptor, and I want to ninjutsu this Moonstare Specialist into play to bounce their Pack Hunter. But we're going to have to use our imagination a little bit. Imagine that my opponent has untapped mana, and I don't want to allow them to use an instant to kill my Moonstare Specialist before it deals damage. I'm happy to just deal I want to deal the 2 damage guaranteed, and I also want to get the ability of the Moonstare Specialist. So once I get the opportunity to ninjutsu, there is a way to do this. But it doesn't work as easily on Arena as you might expect. So I want to have my Disruptor deal damage, then I want to ninjutsu the Specialist into play. And there's a way to do that. You have to ninjutsu in the end of combat step, which if I just don't do anything, Arena's going to skip through that step for me. So I go into full control. Now I'm thinking, okay, Arena's going to stop in the end of combat step for me, and I'll get my opportunity to ninjutsu. And it actually works. So now I've dealt my 2 damage, and now I want to ninjutsu. And so I've got my Moonstare Specialist coming into play. It's bounced their whatever that creature was, and I've gotten to do what I wanted. Obviously, in this particular board state, I dealt 1 less damage because I played that way. But there are times when you want to ninjutsu after your creatures have dealt damage, and in order to do that, you need to go into full control. You need to have it set so that you can see all the phases down here. This the swords expands in the middle of combat, so you get access to all of the phases that are contained inside the combat step. And you need to go into full control and set a stop on the end of combat. So that's how you do that play with ninjutsu. Here's an easy tip that doesn't have anything to do with full control mode. I've got a Lair of the Hydra here, and I've got a ton of lands in play, and I would like to know, how big can I make my Lair of the Hydra? How much should I activate it for? And there's an undocumented feature on Arena that if you just type QQ it's going to tap all of your non-creature mana sources for mana. And so you can see I've gotten 15 there. It didn't tap my 2 Tangled Florahedron, so I'll have to count for those manually. So I've got 17 mana. So I could activate this Lair of the Hydra for 15 and it would still be able to attack. So once you hit QQ, if you want to undo tapping everything, you just hit Z. So now all of my lands have untapped. So again, QQ, I've got 15, Z. So now I know that if I activate this for 15, tapping my Tangled Florahedrons, I will have turned my Lair of the Hydra into a 15/15, and I've used all of my mana. I don't have any extra mana that's gone to waste, and I haven't made this smaller than I should have. So that's just an easy way to check on how much mana you can actually get into your mana pool. All right, here's another example of how you might want to use the end of combat step in combat. So I'm being attacked by 2 1/1s, and I've got this Piercing Light in my hand. And I'm going to want to cast it to deal 2 damage to one of these goblins, but I'm worried, what if Sparky has a card that gives their creature +3/+3, which we're using our imagination a little bit here. There's not actually a card on Arena that would give +3/+3 for a single red mana. There's a card in Magic called Brute Force that would do it, but it's not on Arena. But just imagine that Sparky has Brute Force in their hand. And I really want to get to cast my Piercing Light this turn to kill a creature, but I really don't want to let them use their Brute Force. And I'm willing to take a damage to get this to happen. So I've been attacked. I'm going to want to cast my Piercing Light in the end of combat after the creatures deal damage, because that means that the Brute Force, Sparky could still play it to save their creature, but now the Brute Force isn't dealing 3 extra damage to me. I'm just trading my Piercing Light for the Brute Force, and I'm not taking any extra damage. So basically, this is a trade-off where I take 1 guaranteed damage, but I potentially save myself 3 damage in the worst case. So this is not a play you always want to make, but it's a play that you do want to make when you're concerned that there might be a combat trick that's going to mess with your Piercing Light, and you're willing to take a little bit of damage to play around potentially a bigger downside where you take even more damage, or they might have a combat trick that, does something even worse than just causing you to take a little bit of extra damage. So here you have 2 options. You can set a stop like that, or you can go into full control mode. I think I wasn't clear about that in the previous example with the ninjas. You have 2 ways you can do it. You can click to set a stop, or go into full control. So we're going to do it with a stop this time. So I'm going to pass. I've taken the 2 damage. Okay, now I'm willing to cast my spell, because I don't think the downside of Sparky having some interaction is that big of a deal. I'm willing to risk it. So here I've cast my spell, and it gives me a scry. And I've killed their creature, and then we're going to... I'll put a stop at their end step. So this is another point where you can't play Piercing Light at the end of turn. You can only play it inside the combat step. So your choices are, you can play it before you declare blockers, after you declare blockers, or at the end of combat step, after creatures have dealt damage. And it's a strategy choice when the best time to play it is. But the point is that without using full control or using stops, Arena is not going to give you the choice to cast it at the end of combat. The way you unlock that option is by using full control or setting stops. All right, here's one of my favorite ones. So with sagas, the rules on sagas work pretty strangely. What happens is at the beginning of your main phase, the lore counter gets added to the saga, and in the case of sagas that don't have a backside, so the most recent saga is all their phase 3 is they flip and they turn into a creature. All the previous sagas, which is what this is a saga from Dominaria, the way they all worked is their phase 3 they did something, or their step 3 they did something, and then they would go to the graveyard. Now, if you want to get the ability of the third step, but also bounce the Saga back into your hand with a card like Blink of an Eye or into the Royal, there is a way to do that. Arena's not going to give you that opportunity unless you go into full control mode. And because this is going to happen at the beginning of your main phase, and full control mode resets as you go across phases, you need to set a stop in your upkeep, which is what I've done. Now you need to go into hold full control mode, which the way you do that is by left shift and control. So now if we watch, actually, yeah, okay. So I'm in my draw step. I've drawn a card. I'm now about to go to my main phase. I've gone to my main phase. I'm still in full control mode because I've been in hold full control mode. And now the trigger for the third step of the Saga is on the stack, and I've got priority because I've gone into full control mode. And remember, in Magic, you always get priority whenever you do anything. You pass it to your opponent, and that's generally done automatically by Arena, but by going into full control mode, we've stopped that. We're instead retaining priority when something goes on the stack. So that's giving me an opportunity to cast my Into the Royal, which I can use to return Phyrexian Scriptures back to my hand. And if we watch, I'm still going to get the ability from the third step of the Saga, which is exile the opponent's graveyard. Their Treetop Warden is about to be gone. So you can see I got what I wanted. I was able to use my Into the Royal to put my Saga back into my hand, but I also got the third step of the Saga. This is a pretty important interaction to know if you're playing in like a Dominaria flashback draft. I think that Kaldheim also has sagas that work this way. And this is the way that most sagas in the history of Magic work, so there's probably going to be a set in the future that's going to have sagas that work this way. And it's just a good trick to have in your toolbox, because it's certainly with the cards I have in my hand, these were very powerful cards in Dominaria Limited, and a lot of it was because of this particular interaction that I just showed off. All right, one last example, and I hope you didn't think you were going to go through an entire video of mine without hearing me talk about Tainted Pact, because it's here. So if you've watched any of my previous videos where I go over this deck, you'll notice that the way I kill people almost always when I get into this situation is I go into full control mode. I plus the Jace targeting myself. Because I'm in full control mode, I've retained priority. So then I'm going to respond to my own Jace activation with the Tainted Pact. Now, why do I do it like this? The reason is because it helps me play around my opponent having a removal spell that could kill my Jace. Like Sparky right now has one unknown card. Imagine it's a Hero's Downfall. And so if I just cast my Tainted Pact and didn't do it in response to the Jace activation, I might cast Tainted Pact, then Sparky could play Hero's Downfall and get rid of my Jace, and then I wouldn't win the game. By doing it this way, I'm forcing Sparky to make a choice here. They can choose to play the Hero's Downfall on the Jace before the Tainted Pact resolves, and in that case, I know that I should not Tainted Pact away my entire deck, because I don't want to deck myself if I don't have a Jace in play. So Sparky might say, okay, well, I'm just going to let the Tainted Pact resolve, and then before this Jace trigger resolves, I'm going to play my Hero's Downfall, and then you will have decked yourself and you'll lose. But I've set up a scenario where I have an instant speed draw spell in my hand, Painful Bond, which is going to allow me to draw in response to the Hero's Downfall, which allows the Jace's passive ability to win the game for me before their Hero's Downfall resolves. So if we walk through it, I'm going to resolve this Tainted Pact in a way that's going to set up a win for myself. It's going to take a second to exile all of these cards. for people who aren't familiar with this combo, Jace, Wielder of Mysteries has a static ability on the Planeswalker that says if you would draw a card when your library is empty, instead of you losing the game, you win the game, which that's the basis of this entire deck. And Tainted Pact, which as you can see on the screen, is a card that if you don't have any duplicates in your deck, it allows you to exile your entire deck at will. So now I've gotten to the point where I've got an empty deck and I've got a Jace activation on the stack. So here's where Sparky might decide, okay, I want to play Hero's Downfall. If they play their Hero's Downfall, in response, I'm going to cast the Painful Bond, drawing 2 cards, and then we'll allow this. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead, ability to trigger. So this is a very, very important interaction to understand if you want to play this Tainted Pact deck well, is how you can take advantage of going into full control mode to set up this scenario where you can use instant speed draw spells in your hand to actually beat people trying to remove your Jace. It requires you to have mana to do the whole combo all at once and pay for the draw spells, but that's something that you can set up as the game goes longer. So those were my tips and tricks. And thank you, Sparky, for being a punching bag for this video. I hope you guys found these helpful. If something wasn't clear, please leave a comment and I'll try to explain it better. If you have some other tips and tricks you want to point out, please leave a comment about those and maybe I'll make a second video like this. But these were these are all things that I do, maybe not on a daily basis, but frequently. This is how you can actually get advantages from using full control mode, how it unlocks additional options to actually make better technical plays. It's not just a mode that you go into when you want to slow the game down for no reason. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.